So welcome to Thursdays with Troy. As always, I'm Troy Lambert, mystery author, editor, and super plotterer, and your host. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you USA Today bestselling author Bronwen Evans. Bronwen writes historical and contemporary sexy romances. We'll talk about what that means in a couple of minutes. For the modern woman who likes intelligent, spirited heroines and compassionate alpha heroes. She lives in New Zealand with her dogs, Brandy and Duke. Welcome, Bronwen, and welcome, Brandy and Duke, by default.
Well, I hope you don't hear too much of Brandy and Duke, but they might be a bit of barking at some stage.
That is okay. And we call those, when dogs interrupt, we call those canine enhancements. They are wonderful parts of our interviews. So today what we're going to talk about, as many of you may or may not know, that Plottr contains a variety of plot templates to help you structure and pace your story and to get started. Today we're going to talk about the Michael Haig plot system, which is a 6-stage plot template. And we're going to talk about how you adapt that to writing romance. So if you look at the starter templates in Plottr, this is the 6-stage plot structure. It's often used for screenplays and for other types of writing. But in this case, we're going to talk about relating it to romance. So let's talk about genre for just a minute. So let's talk about what defines sexy romance. Let's just define the type of romance that you write to start with.
Well, a sexy romance tends to have, there's romances which are sweet, which will have maybe hand-holding and things, and then it progresses all the way up to what we call heat level 5, where there's full consensual sex in a story, and
right.
That's what tends to be in my stories. But I like to call it sensual rather than sex, because it's all about the emotion behind the sex, and therefore it's got to be an emotive sex scene, and there has to be a reason why that sex is occurring. So you don't just throw in a sex scene for the sake of throwing in a sex scene. It has to relate to the story and the character development.
Excellent. That is a really good definition. So tell me about reader expectations for this particular, so it's basically a subgenre of romance. So what are reader expectations that you feel like you really need to hit the mark if you're writing this genre?
I think the same thing applies. There are some people that, everyone's heard of Jane Austen, for example. I write Regency historicals, and Jane Austen, if you're a pure Jane Austen reader, you probably don't like a lot of sex in your Regency stories. But a lot of the more modern readers like a sexy story. You'll tend to get a group of readers who will prefer Regency, what I call traditional, which is no sex on the page and very sweet. And then you'll get the readers who like the more sexy reads, and they expect an emotional read with that.
Right, emotional read along with the sex. Okay, so what's the difference when you're writing it in a historical context? So more of the historical kind of that Regency thing. Is there a difference between that and one with a modern setting?
I think so, because you've got the social norms of the time. So, for example, pregnancy is obviously a huge issue in Regency, whereas it's not in modern times so much. But in modern times, you've got the HIV situation with condoms and everything else, whereas in Regency you don't have any of that issue. You still have sexually transmitted diseases, but they didn't seem to worry about that. So it's really just about the social norms and what was expected of women in those times. So, for example, there wasn't supposed to be any sex before marriage. So in modern time, of course, that happens all the time. So it's really just the social situations that drive it.
Excellent. That is very interesting to note that reader expectations, of course, are based on when it is set, and they expect you to do that research and understand that. So what made you choose this template for writing romance?
I'm one of those lucky people that sold their very first book that they'd finished and to a traditional house. And of course, they then expected book 2 and book 3. And I only had a limited time to write that book. And what happened with book 2 is I ended up writing, I think, 200 and something thousand words for a 90,000 word novel. And it was because I didn't plot. And that's when I suddenly realised that if I was going to write to deadlines and to write quickly, that for me, I definitely needed an outline and a plot. I think Michael Haig came to one of the Romance Writers of America conferences, and I happened to be in there listening to his presentation. And what I really, really liked was his development in terms of the 6 acts. I think really fits the romance character arc and development of a romance, and the turning points all seem to make sense to me. And what I really loved, it was a plotting thing that was based on percentages. So I could do any size book and follow that plotting structure. So all I did is, if it's 60,000 words, then the first 10% is only 6,000 words. If it's 90,000 words, it's 9,000 words. So it's very easy to plot different length books using the same plotting method. But in particular, I think his turning points at the percentages he's got really suit the romance arc, if you like.
Right. That's actually an excellent point. And it leads us to, we're going to jump right into sharing exactly how you use this in for your particular books. So let me pull up this template here, and we will put that on the full screen. And so essentially in this one, first of all, we're going to look at kind of a bare bones outline that you have, where you basically have these 6 stages outlined. So talk to us about where you start when you're planning a book this way, because this one, obviously you have a bare bones outline. So tell us how that comes about.
Right. What I normally do when I start with the Michael Haig plot is I've already written my blurb and probably a synopsis. So I've got a general idea of the story in itself and where I want it to go. I then go into each of the stages and I'll put how many words I have to be at the end of that stage. So you'll see in setup, I think I've got there 6,000 words. That says to me this is a 60,000 word book, and the first 10%, because Michael Haig goes by 10%. So I can say, well, the setup, the first 10% of the book has got to be around 6,000 words, and then I can write roughly what those 6,000 words are going to be, but I'll jump ahead. So basically I'll start and I'll put into each of these stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, how many words are in each of those stages. Then I actually plan out my turning points. So I'll go to opportunity. I haven't done that for this book, I don't think. But I'll go to opportunity and I'll have noted from my blurb or synopsis what the opportunity is roughly going to be. And I'll put those turning points through the story. So once I've got the turning points in, when we talk about turning points, we know what's sort of got to happen to drive the next stage, if you like, in your book, what's going to drive the story forward. So that's why I go in and I roughly put a turning point. I put in what that turning point will be. So I will have gone in and put in, and you'll be able to see that on when you do the slow ride one, but I'll put in what the opportunity is going to be, then what the change of plans is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that roughly when I'm writing out my scenes, I've got to get to about 6,000 words. The opportunity's got to be there. And then when I get to, I think turning point 2, it's 25%. So when I get to 25% of the book, that change of plan's got to occur. So that's how I use Michael Haig. And then under each stage, I'll start plotting out scenes. I break it down, and you'll see that in the next book that I've already done. And that's why I like Michael Haig, because it keeps me focused on the relationship and the plot, because they're both interrelated, if you like. So at each turning point, I know where the relationship and plot has got to be.
Right, exactly. So I like how under each of these, tell us about, like, under progress, the one that I have up here now, you say in a romance, the characters will often dance around each other at this point. I see that you've developed some guidance for yourself basically within these different stages. How did you kind of creatively come up with that yourself and see how that was related?
This is Michael Haig. This is all Michael Haig.
So the romance part is his as well. Okay.
Is his as well. He's works quite a lot with romance authors. He's done a lot of work with romance writers of America, and lots of, like, you can have one-on-one sessions with him and talk through the plot of your book, which I've done a couple of times. He knows story. That's what I love about Michael Haig. He's very good on story, and I think that's what's so important in any book, is the story that you're telling. So I find him very, very helpful on the romance side. He understands the development of a romance and how it should work.
Excellent. Well, okay, on that note, let's go to your project tab and let's look at the one that you've actually created. So I can see that you created, in the initial one, you kind of have the notes that you talked to us about in the 6,000 words, and then you have several points underneath of it. So talk to us about those. Those are essentially your chapters, or how does that look for you?
They're my themes. I usually write in themes, and then as I'm going, I'll decide where the chapter breaks are going to be, because you always need to end a scene on a hook or a cliffhanger to make someone go on to the next chapter. So I tend to think in scenes and sequels rather than just chapters. So what you can see I've done is I've said, well, the setup's got to be 6,000 words, and I've based it in Hawaii. So in that box, I always put where they are and how many words it is. And then I just go plus underneath, and I create a scene, and then I create the next scene, and then the next scene, knowing that that can't be more than about 6,000 words. So you've got to work out how you move your story forward in the best way within 6,000 words. And then you'll see turning point 1, I've got up the top there that it happens around 6,000 words. And then I'll say exactly what that turning point is.
That is really, I'm just going through your little things here, and this is really extremely well done. Do you put word counts within these things, like targets for each scene, or do you just write them organically? And
I used to set up and do word counts for each scene, but I tend to do it organically now because I've written so many books. I've up to about 30-something books, and I've used this for the majority of them. So I'm quite used to it, and it does tend to happen naturally now when I'm writing. I've got friends who write the same amount of words per scene, whereas I find that can stifle your story. Some scenes may need to be long, and if you're throwing in a sequel, that might only be half a page. So I think it's just, for me, it's just writing what I want to achieve in that 6,000 words and breaking them into the scenes.
Excellent. How detailed are your scene summaries here? I see that there's quite a few words in just the summaries themselves. So how detailed are your summaries?
It just depends whether I know that in my head or whether I want to get down enough information so that I know where the story's going if I've left it for a few days and then come back. I tend to just write what I want to write and then leave it. And I do export this to Word so that I've got a written out chapter by chapter, obviously template of what I'm writing for each of the scenes. So that functionality of being able to print it into Word is really, really useful.
I was actually just going to ask you about that, about how you export your files.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also, I want to look at how you use notes to an extent. We're only going to look at notes and characters really quickly, but I just wanted to see how you develop these high concepts for the book and where that influences your plotting.
This one here is just a note because at some stage, Jason's probably going to get a book. So it's really useful to just make some notes around what Jason's doing in this story so that when I'm writing his story, I've already got the notes around what might have been going on with Jason in the previous book, so that I don't have to go back and reread the book. I've already got some notes on some of the things that Jason's been doing because he's likely to get his own book. That's what this one is for. High concept 2, I don't know what I've put in there. That's just the concept for this story, and that's what I'm saying. I sort of do high concept, then I do a blurb, and then I do a synopsis, and I tend to put the high concept in here just to remind me about the characters themselves, just to make sure, that everything I'm doing relates to that high concept.
Right, so this is usually done before you actually start plotting. In a separate thing, just pull it into Plottr.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's nice just to be able to flick to it. And also everything prints out in that Word document, which is what I love. I've got everything in one document in one place. So it doesn't matter where I'm writing. I don't have to necessarily have Plottr open because I've got it on my paper. And if my editor or anyone wants to see it, then you've got something there as well.
Right. You can pass it along to them. So
yes.
that's actually very handy too, because we use Plottr for editing as well, which is really an interesting application. So tell me about characters and your character development. I see that you've got some attributes that obviously that you've added for each character. And so tell me about what you want to know about each character and how you develop them.
Well, characters are the most important part of the story because it's what people are reading for. They fall in love with your characters and they want your characters to have their happy ever after. So I tend to try and do my characters in depth. And I may sit and do 2 pages of just this character's talking to me about his life and what he's doing. And then what I do is try to put some of that back into Plottr so that I've got everything there, especially if you're doing series. And that's what I love about Plottr, is the fact you can put your series into one project so that all these characters are still there if I move on to the next book. So if I need to remind myself about Jake, for example, who's going to have his own book, which is the first one that you pulled up, I've got some information about Jake. It might not be as in depth until I write Jake's book, but I'll have something in there. Right. So I know that when I write Jake's book, this is what he's already portrayed as in the previous book. So I'm just going to have to expand that.
That is great, actually. And that leads me to my next question about, obviously, is this a new series since you have one book and then you have a...
It's not actually. The first 2 were written before I got into Plottr, but there's going to be there's Slow Rides coming out in June and I'm finishing that at the moment. And then the one that you had, the first one up there, is the next one. And then Jason's going to get his story, and I haven't titled that. So The Unexpected Christmas Gift is a Christmas novella coming out at Christmas. And then the next one is going to be Jason's book. So it's a great way of keeping all your series together.
Oh, that's great. I was curious about that if this was a series, but it's great that you're also planning your series in Plottr.
And I've got a historical series planned entirely in Plottr. That's the first book's coming out at the end of this year. So it's a fantastic place to keep everything together, especially the character side of it. And places is the other one I use. I haven't used it so much in this one, but in historicals, I've used it quite a lot because you've got big country houses. It's a great place to even put up the plan of the house so you know exactly where the rooms are when you come to write the next book, etc., etc.
Ooh, that's another great application of Plottr. I've seen people do some very creative things with them, and that's actually a really brilliant way to use it. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're using this for so many genres. So let's break from our screen sharing for just a moment. And let's talk about what makes Plottr the right choice for helping you create your stories.
Well, the biggest thing for me was as soon as I saw you had Michael Haig's system in there, that was it. I think that's fantastic that what Plottr does. It doesn't say this is how you should plot. It allows you to pick a plotting method that's already there, or it allows you to actually build your own method that suits you. And that's such a great tool because writers are all different, as you know. We all do things differently, and we take bits of everything and mix it all together. So, for me, I just thought having everything in one place was just exactly what I needed, and then the ability to export it into a Word document so that I can share my outline with my editor, what I call my critique partners. So before I even start writing the book, I can say, look, this is what my book's going to be, and they can come in and say, well, you could deepen here and change this here. So it's a fantastic tool to have for plotting.
So has Plottr made you a faster writer?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's different, but I'm quite a slow writer, and I have worked out over the years that I need to know where I'm going. If I have to sit down and there's just an empty page and I don't know what my story is, the words just don't come. Whereas if I know I've got to get to this point and I know basically what sort of scenes I need, it makes it much easier. And I think it makes it a deeper book because you can think of scenes. So say your his parents died in a fire, for example. You can think of things that might happen in his life that reinforces that fear or helps him overcome that fear. And then you can create those scenes, and you can do that in Plottr. And you can think about, well, what sort of scenes would make that wound even worse or help him overcome it. And that's what I like about Plottr is the ability to plot those to make a deeper story.
Yes, it's an excellent brainstorming tool is what I find as well. That is fantastic. One of the things we like to ask people, besides Plottr, what are some other resources that have helped you get to where you are today? Obviously, you're a very successful, and despite saying that you're a slow writer, you're very prolific. So what resources have helped you get to where you are and to be that prolific?
Something that you might see when you look at some of the writing within those Plottr things. I'm slightly dyslexic. I have a problem with sentence structures and things. So some of my things like Pro Writing Aid, where I loved writing for Random House, for example, they knew that I needed really good editors and good edit. And they still accepted me and took my books. And I guess that's because I'm a good storyteller. So I might not be the best writer in terms of skills, but I've got a very good story voice, if you like. So Pro Writing Aid really, really helped me because it will go through and clean up my manuscript before I send it in. So that's always great. But I tend to be pretty simple. I'm pretty much... my background is marketing. That's what I'm qualified in. So I guess for me, blurbs and things like that come naturally. I'm quite good at those, and so I don't tend to have a problem with that sort of thing. And so I think what was really missing in terms of my output was the ability to plot, because I can't write to a blank screen. I have to know what I'm doing. I've got great beta readers, great editors, and I don't really need terribly much on top of that in terms of writing skills. I think the biggest thing if you're a writer is to read what's selling, read what is obviously popular, read what readers are wanting, and create good stories with good characters.
That's great advice, and it actually leads me to my next question of where can people stalk and find you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, obviously. I don't tend to be on Twitter or anything like that. I've got a website, bronwenevans.com, obviously. But Facebook tends to be where I interact with readers. I'm on Instagram a little bit, not terribly much. I like interacting with readers, and I find Facebook is probably the best place for that because they can really interact with you well and ask you questions. Bronwen Evans Author, I think, is my Facebook handle.
Excellent. Well, we'll drop some links. I'll have you drop some links in the comments below once we're done with this so people can find where you are. You did mention Romance Writers of America. Are you a member of any other associations? Or
obviously Romance Writers of New Zealand.
Oh, yes.
I belong to, and I Marie Force has got a author support network, which is a Facebook group with about 8,000 writers. I'm obviously in the Plottr group. There's quite a few Facebook groups. I'm in an Australasian group, which is just for Australasian writers, because we sometimes do feel cut off from the rest of the world, as you can imagine, especially with COVID at the moment. So, New Zealand borders are closed. So I don't know when I'll ever get back to the States at this stage.
Well, hopefully that will resolve itself.
Yes.
So because you're from New Zealand, now I do have a question for you. We have a question of the day every Thursdays with Troy, and I like to mix up this question a little bit. I like it to be related to where the author is. And so I'd like to ask you advice for new writers that's based on things that I see in New Zealand. So New Zealand is a really interesting place. I see it's much like Southeast Idaho, where I grew up. The sheep outnumber the people. Yes. which is rather interesting. But there are also, New Zealand has a lot of golf courses.
Yes.
A lot of golf courses. Mm-hmm. Are you a golfer?
I'm a golfer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also, New Zealand was one of the first places where bungee jumping really took off as an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent. So I would ask you, what's your advice for a new writer just starting out? Is golf or bungee jumping?
Well, as I am absolutely petrified of heights and I love golf, I would say golf. Golf in New Zealand is so cheap compared to the rest of the world. Like we pay maybe $500 a year for membership and at beautiful courses.
Wow.
And we have, I think, some of the most number of golf courses around the world in one small country. They're everywhere. So yeah, I would say golf. And the other thing about golf is, I don't know if I ever have a writer's block, I take the dogs for a walk. And so that's what I like about golf. You've got, 3 hours to 4 hours walking around a golf course, and you can, clarify things. Characters can pop in and say hello and start talking to you. So that's why I'd say golf.
That is an excellent answer, but I do have one more question. When borders open, could I come down and bungee jump on a golf course?
I don't know that there is any bungee jumping. Oh, well, if you go down south to where A.J. Hackett started in Queenstown, there's plenty of golf courses around there. So you wouldn't be very far from the bungee jump to the golf course.
So, okay. All right. Well, just, kind of had to clear that up. We like to answer the questions that writers are really keen to answer. All right. Thanks for tuning in, as always, to Thursdays with Troy. And we appreciate you being here, Bronwen, and sharing your process. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next Thursday.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.